Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 686, and today's date is June 5th, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. Government's Recovery Has Turned into the Biggest Economic Collapse. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that Greece completely missed the payment today. They decided they don't have enough money, which we kind of knew. And we also knew they were going to bundle this payment into the other payments and pay all of it at the end of the month. This is to buy them some time, and we reported on this a couple of reports ago, where they were discussing missing the payment and bundling the payment. And now we hear that Tspiras and Putin are going to hold telephone talks to discuss cooperation in business and energy sectors. Maybe Putin is going to help Greece, and Greece is going to help Russia by getting out of the Eurozone and moving towards the BRICS and Russia. Or the other scenario, Russia will just fund them and they will leave the Euro and basically go on their own. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But what we're seeing right now is that Syriza's party hardliners, they've suggested in recent days that they might dissent if Tspiras strikes a deal that they consider a violation of the anti-austerity pledges that brought the government party to power. So they're saying, listen, if you decide at this point in time to implement austerity, there's going to be major problems here. And we know the people are going to be very upset about this. And it's not going to go well. While this is happening and Greece is not making this payment, the people of Greece are nervous. They're scared. They know what happened in Cyprus. They realize and they understand that they need to get their money out of the banks. Right now, the Greek banks are on the verge of a complete and total collapse. There are bank runs. People are pulling their euros out of the bank. Today, 700 million euros alone, just today. This is how nervous and scared the people are. Because they realize that these banks could be shut down, capital controls could be implemented, and they will not be able to get to their money. So they're taking it out beforehand, and this is what we've been talking about all along. If we see things falling apart, or maybe start now, most people believe, and I do, is that you only keep as much as you need in the bank to pay your bills. The other, you need to have on hand just in case. Of course, I would have gold, or I would have silver. I would have weapons, supplies, medical supplies, food, water. Because you can see Greece, right now, they're heading down a path of complete collapse. Unless Russia helps them out, the BRICS system helps them out. Otherwise, who gets stuck? It's always the people. And this is why you need to be prepared. I mean, we've seen it in Cyprus. Now we're seeing it in Greece, and this will spread to other Euro countries. We see it out in the UK. More than 8,300 people a week in England are at risk of losing their home. This is a report by the homelessness charity shelter. The London boroughs of Barking, Dagenham are the worst affected by Britain's housing crisis, with 1 in every 38 homes potentially at risk of repossession. So if we're in this incredible recovery, everything is fine, businesses are fine, why are we seeing this at this point in time? Because what's happening today is none of these countries are in any type of recovery. They're in a bubble recovery. They're in a central bank recovery. They are not in a true economic recovery. This is where the confusion is with everyone. There is a very big difference where the economy is driven by the central bankers and the economy that is driven by the people. Right now, the people are not driving the economy. Why? Because they are tapped out. They don't have the high-paying jobs. They have part-time jobs. They don't have savings. A lot of people have no credit to purchase things. It's a spiral into an economic collapse situation. It's spiraling down into this situation. And it's not improving whatsoever. It's getting worse as time goes on. I mean, here in the United States, all of a sudden, the BLS says the U.S. added 280,000 jobs, with the April print revised from 223,000 to 221,000, but March was revised higher from 85 to 119. They love just playing with the numbers. This was the highest monthly increase in payroll since December of 2014. That was during the holiday season. What's driving this right now to increase? Nothing. So the unemployment rate went from 5.4% to 5.5%. Doesn't even make sense. But when we look at this, we can see that we have turned into a part-time nation. 6.6 million Americans are working part-time, and it's not by choice. It's because they cannot find the full-time job. Another 72,000 workers are now working part-time as of last month because their hours were cut or they lost their full-time job and they had to get a part-time job. Maybe this is why we saw so many jobs added. Because when you lose the one full-time and you have to take out two part-times, one lost, two gained. They don't even count the lost. They're just showing you, two jobs were gained. That's it. So we can see right now the total number of involuntary part-time workers, it jumped to 6.6 million from 6.5 million. This is a part-time economy. And we know that there are more layoffs coming down the line. We know that HSBC, JP Morgan Chase, and many other companies are continually laying off, especially in the retail sector. So where are all these fantastic jobs that they're talking about? Well, they're telling us that we're in a recovery, that jobs are being had by all these people. There's nothing to worry about. And we're seeing the quality of jobs that are added month on month. They're all disappointing. And May was no difference. We are seeing that 4 of the 5 main job additions were the low-paying jobs. Education and health, 74,000 jobs added. Leisure and hospitality, 57,000 jobs added. Retail, 31,000 jobs. Temp help, 20,000 jobs added. In fact, these lowest quality jobs accounted for 2/3 of all jobs gains in May. As for the well-paid jobs, mining and lodging, down 18,000. Information, down 3,000. Interestingly enough, financial services up 13,000. Well, that's because the stock market continually goes up, and those companies are hiring until the entire thing comes collapsing down. We saw this back in 2006 going into 2008. And then all of a sudden, what happened after the crash? All those people that were hired, they lost their jobs. Construction is up 17,000. But we have to look at this closer because it is down more than half from April's 35,000 jobs. So, and this is the hot season right now. This does not look good. We are headed into an area where we are turning further and further into a part-time nation, moving away from the full-time jobs. This economy cannot be supported with part-time work because you have to remember, the amount of money that everyone is making now has been lowered. The revenue going into the government has been lowered by this. We see that 93 million people are still out of the workforce. The labor force participation rate rose just barely from 62.8 to 62.9. A range it has been for the past year, and we haven't seen this since 1978. So, why do we have all these part-time jobs? Who are getting these jobs? Well, what's very interesting about all of this is not just those people who are losing their full-time jobs. We've had 25 million foreign-born workers employed in the U.S. The number of foreign-born individuals holding jobs in the United States increased by 279,000 in May. In January 2009, President Obama took office. There were about 21 million foreign-born workers employed in the United States. Since then, the number has increased by 3.7 million. The BLS does not distinguish between legal immigrants to the United States who are permitted to work here and illegal aliens who are not. It's all in the same basket. Ah, that makes sense. Now we know why they are letting in the illegals. We know why Obama created the memorandum to allow these people to get working permits. It makes sense. I have no problem with people coming into this country. My grandparents came into this country. But they need to go through the correct process. Not just jump the border and say, okay, because of this new memorandum, you can't touch me. I'm legal. Give me my working papers and let me go to work. And we're starting to see the agenda here. The OECD now expects the U.S. economy growth to slow. And of course, we had the IMF out there telling us that GDP is no longer going to be 3.1%. It's down to 2.5%. The OECD is now saying it's going to be around 2%. Well, that's going to be very difficult to obtain, but we'll see how they manipulate these numbers, because we're seeing the GDP numbers right now in the negative, near zero, but we know they're about to manipulate all this. And they are also warning that by 2016, 40 million people will be out of work, 7.5 million more than immediately before the crisis. So is this economy really improving? Or are we headed to the biggest collapse you've ever seen? That's exactly where we are headed. Now, they keep telling us that wages have increased, that we see a wage growth of 2.3%. But when we look closely at this, it looks like it's managers and supervisors who are pushing up the wage increase, not the everyday worker who's just working at their job. We see theirs has increased quite a bit. The everyday worker, not so much. And this is why we saw wages go up. And we understand that all of this does not help retail. It does not help the housing industry. It does not help the auto industry. And this is why we see these industries in these gigantic bubbles that were pumped up by the central bank, not from the people here in the United States. This is a central bank economy, not a people economy. And we're starting to see that people don't have the ability to purchase homes, because if they did, they'd be able to go out and get a mortgage. And we're starting to see that mortgage applications have fallen again. The volume fell 17% compared with the previous week. Applications for refinances fell 12%. This is the 6th straight week the volume of applications have fallen. This is the hot time for real estate. So these cash buyers are really going to have to take up the slack to keep this bubble inflated. Because otherwise, it's going to come crumbling down. It's going to pop. And at this point, what we see is the central bank, they're starting to lose control of what's really going on in the economy and their fake economy. And it's getting harder and harder to convince people that everything is fine, because people who are losing their jobs are starting to wake up saying, okay, something's wrong here. I just lost my job. I got laid off. I'm putting out my resume and there's nothing. I can't find work, so I have to take a part-time job while I continually send out my resume. And as time goes on, longer and longer and longer, they lose their skills. And this has been the problem. But we see the world is looking at this, and they know exactly what's going on. They realize that this economy here in the US, in Europe, Canada, Australia cannot be sustained like this. That eventually it will fall apart. And we see Russia right now who's saying that, you know something? We're going to increase our gold reserves by 500 billion. Russia's central bank says it is determined to boost the country's gold reserves to pre-2013 levels of at least 500 billion. Because they realize the gold will shield them, will insure them. And this is why China, Russia, India, and other nations are continually accumulating gold. We see Canada is out there and they're warning that Russia will not be able to join the G7. If Putin steps down from power and they're able to put in a puppet government in Russia, then Russia can join the G7. And Stephen Harper is out there, and he pledged to strongly oppose Russia rejoining the group of 7 nations as long as Putin is president. And Russia's looking at this saying, you know something? Fine. We don't need to be part of the G7. We're starting the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation, the Eurasian Union. We're trading in our own currencies. We're accumulating more gold. We know what's coming. We understand at this point in time. Russia's largest bank, Sberbank, has issued its first yuan-denominated letters of credit that involve funding from the Export-Import Bank of China to Russia's largest pharmaceutical company. The issue of credit guarantees become part of Russia-Chinese major program of financial cooperation, completely bypassing the dollar. They don't need the United States. They don't need the private Western Central Bank. And every time they make this move, they're showing the world you can do it without it. And we're seeing a lot more countries start to do this. Now, we understand with Obamacare, when it first came out, the president was out there, it's going to be affordable to everyone. It's going to be very inexpensive. That's why they named it the Affordable Care Act, of course. These titles are always the opposite, and we understand that the insurance premiums are continually going up. And now we have confirmation that, yes, insurance premiums will be going up, and most likely they will be going up every single year. And we're starting to see that PricewaterhouseCoopers Health Research Institute is saying, yes, the rates will go up in all age brackets. So everyone is going to have a tough time paying for these new rates. And we see a lot of insurance companies saying they might even hike them as far and as high as 50%. And this is going to knock a lot of people out of insurance. This is basically not helping anyone. This system is the same that we had, the same companies, but with worse health benefits and higher prices. That's it. And now we have a penalty if we don't take it. So what did we really get? This is not universal health care. This is force the people into it and charge them a lot more and give them less. That's all it is. That's what the government gave us. And guess what? Congress, the president, they're all exempt from it. If it's so great, why don't they want it? Why did they exempt themselves and keep their policy Again, I say this, and I've said this many times. They should have been on the front lines. If they are true leaders and they believe in what they're doing and what they're giving the people, they should have been the first. But guess what? They weren't. They decided to exempt themselves. We know the G7 meeting will be going on, and there's protests now out in Munich. And the underlying principle for the protests are because of policies like militarization, war operations abroad, repression, and disregard of protest rights at home. This is why they're protesting. And they're out there letting the central bankers, the country's leaders, know that the people are upset with them. But again, as we know, the central bankers, they have no allegiance to any country, to any people. They don't care. They don't care about the protests as long as they're making their profit and they're pushing debt further and further out, and they have the ability to control countries. That's all they care about. Now, we understand the United States government central bankers have been trying to get into Nigeria, and the Nigerian government back in the day did not want the United States in there to help them fight Boko Haram. They have close ties with China. The United States tried in many cases to get into Nigeria because, of course, they want to garrison the country, put their oil on the dollar. And the United States right now is making their move. We know Nigeria had an election. There's a new president now. So the United States is going to send a team to Nigeria in the next few weeks to discuss with the new government ways to renew cooperation in the fight against Boko Haram. Washington has quickly reached out to the new president since his election, and they sent U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to his inauguration, and now they are going to visit Nigeria in hopes that they can have a cooperation and they can send military advisors to help train the forces in Nigeria, and then eventually bring in troops into this area. And once the country is garrisoned and the government goes along with the United States, they'll bring in more troops. If the government goes against the United States, there will be terror attacks and a coup d'etat. This was their plan from the beginning, and now they're moving forward with it. Out in Ukraine, we see that Ukraine is trying to get the property of Russia. They're making their move in Austria, and they're claiming that Ukraine should be able to get Russia's property in Vienna, and the Austrian court is rejecting this from Ukraine, saying, no, it doesn't belong to you. We see Poroshenko is selling his shares of Roshan, which is his chocolate company, candy company. He promised to do this in his election campaign, and he's selling his shares to the Rothschild under a trust deal. So it's really not sold. And it's going to the central banking cartel. So they're holding it in trust for him. We see Poroshenko right now is ruling out the referendum on Donbass secession. He's saying, no, we're not going to let Donbass secede from the Ukraine. They're part of Ukraine. Kiev is trying to explain away why they had to move their military assets and shell different areas of Donetsk and Lugansk. They're saying, well, we told the OSCE that we were going to do this, that we're going to move all the military assets back up to the contact line and start shelling. Yeah, we even had a press conference, and the OSCE is saying, well, I don't remember this. When was this? We don't see this. And we see the United States government, when it's questioned about all the violations of the Minsk II agreement, Maria Harf is out there saying, yeah, we don't see this at all. There's violations from Ukraine? No, that can't be. It's all the rebels. And we know it is Kiev. They've been cited in so many different violations. It's laughable at this point in time. Ukraine is continually shelling the DPR village. As soon as the OSCE leaves the area, they start shelling. So what's happening here is Kiev is renouncing the Minsk ceasefire agreement. They're saying Minsk is dead. We don't really care about it. And we're going to do whatever we possibly want, because in the last 24 hours, they have committed 58 violations in the last 24 hours. So they really don't care about the Minsk 2. In the corporate media and the propaganda, with everything else that's going on, they pretend they're going along with it. But in the darkness of night, they don't care about it whatsoever. And we can see at this point in time, they're going to continue the dirty war, where out of one side of their mouth, they're going to say, we're following the Minsk 2 agreement. And on the other side of their mouth, they're telling their troops to shell, to bomb, and to start a war. And this is what they're trying to do. The Ukrainian parliament has adopted amendments to state law allowing admission of the armed forces of other states on the territory of Ukraine. Now, if they're saying this is all for the peacekeepers, because we're trying to have peace in the Donbass area, but of course this is in violation of the Minsk 2 ceasefire agreement, where they're bringing in outside forces, and the amendment also allows them to bring in foreign weapons and weapons of mass destruction. And it's mentioned in their documents. They're saying the presence of such armed forces in Ukraine should ensure an early normalization of situation in Donbass. That it would help restore law and order and life to that area, and allow the people to have their constitutional rights and freedoms in that area. No, what they're doing is they're ready to declare martial law. As soon as they create and push forward this offensive, and they gain control of this area, they will declare martial law, and they need the foreign peacekeeping military units in there to control the situation. And believe me, there'll be no freedom. The people will not have any rights. It will be lockdown. There'll be curfews. People will be taken away in the middle of the night. This is all an illusion to convince everyone that, no, we're not doing anything wrong here. We see the situation in Ukraine is definitely getting worse. And one of the indicators that we see right now is that U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter said on Thursday the situation with Russia had taken a sad turn. And he was gathering now U.S. military leaders and diplomats to assess the effectiveness of NATO's strategy towards Moscow in response to what's happening in Ukraine right today. He's gathering the 24 U.S. military leaders, and they're going to be talking about what they're going to do and how they're going to approach the situation going forward. He said we were absolutely hoping for something different, but it appears that Putin is taking his country in a different direction. Remember, Kerry went over to have a talk with him. And I said before that Kerry was having the talk about, listen, you need to be on our side. You need to stop and go along with what we're going to do, because we're going to make an offensive in Ukraine, and we will be going into Syria. So you make your decision right now, because if you decide to be on the other side, this is going to start World War III. And we don't care. We will start World War III. If you come on our side, we'll make you rich. You'll be part of the private Western Central Bank system. And we'll work together. And we can see right now that this situation is going to escalate. And Russia is going to be on one side in many different areas, and China will be on one side, and the United States is going to be on another. And we've heard many people say that this most likely will go nuclear. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, yeah, this will go nuclear, because again, the central bankers, they've been prepared for this. They realize that this could go nuclear. And you have to remember, their main focus is to depopulate the world, to start this entire system over. So this plays right into their plan. And we can see at this point in time, it is all building up. I mean, the Pentagon right now is considering putting in intermediate range cruise missiles in Europe. And they will point them towards Moscow. And these missiles are capable of holding nuclear weapons. So, what's happening here? The U.S. government central bankers are now moving forward with their plan. And we can see we are in the month of June. They've been building on this. Propaganda's coming out for Ukraine. Propaganda's coming out in Syria. And always before they make their move, we see the propaganda. And we know Congress goes on vacation in August. We've seen many different events occur right at the end of July going into August. And I can see at this point in time, indicators are all pointing to this moment. Now, can something change? Of course it can. But as of right now, it looks like something is ready to go live. And it's not going to be good. And we're going to have to watch and keep an eye on this and see how this turns out. Now, we understand out in the Middle East, things are not improving whatsoever. We know the Houthis said, yes, we will agree to talks, but we don't want the pre-existing conditions. And we can see that the talks are not going well because, of course, the U.S. government central bankers, they only see things in absolutes. Lay down your weapons, surrender, install the puppet government back into power, and everything will be fine. And we see Saudi Arabia is continually bombing, using cluster bombs, chemical weapons, and of course, nothing on the news whatsoever. Nothing about war crimes, nothing about the weapons they're using. Actually, the United States government and the corporate media, they're just looking the other way. But this happens time and time again, that the U.S., through proxy armies, always seem to use the chemical weapons, always seems to use white phosphorus, always seems to use cluster bombs. And then they turn it around and blame it on the other country. Well, this time it's a little difficult because the Yemen people aren't flying planes. So how can they explain away the use of cluster bombs and chemical weapons? They can't. It's very difficult to. So they just ignore it. We see the Yemeni people are rallying in the capital to condemn the Saudi attacks. The people are coming together. They're saying enough is enough. We just want to live in peace. We want to have our own government, and we don't want the U.S. involved. And this is why they're fighting. This is why they're continually holding their ground. Because they want the right to live free, to make their own living, to live in peace, to have their own government. But again, the U.S. government, central bankers, they can't allow that. They can't allow that in any of these countries, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine. And this is why they continually push war in this area. Now in Yemen, we realize there's a lot of fighting along the border, and right now the Yemen army says it has captured a number of Saudi soldiers during border clashes, and these are the Houthis who have captured them, and they're saying that these Saudi bombings and everything that's going on, they're not focusing on the Houthis themselves. They're focusing on public hospitals. They're focusing on universities. And they're continually bombing the infrastructure of Yemen and bombing the everyday person. So we can see that this is not really against the Houthis. This is against the people of Yemen saying, listen, you will stay in line, and if you decide not to agree on your puppet master, We will destroy you until you beg for the puppet government to come back. And this is exactly what they're doing. Out in Libya, we see the situation is completely getting worse. We understand the internationally recognized government, which is no longer in Tripoli and on the outskirts of Libya, they decided to help the people of Libya. No, actually, they didn't help the people of Libya. You know what they did? They helped the central bank. Their instructions were to move it from Tripoli out to Al-Bayda. And they're moving the central bank at this point to protect it. So they're not helping the people. They're not protecting the people. They don't care about the people. Their first order of business was to protect the central bank and to move it out of Tripoli, where the new government is. And this is what it's all about. It's about the private Western central bank in these countries and selling their natural resources using the dollar. And this is why we're fighting all these wars. Not for freedom, not for democracy. All the soldiers who are out there are fighting for the central bankers. That's what they're doing. And we can see that the propaganda is running wild about Syria. They're continually bringing up that Assad is helping the Islamic State. The Islamic State and Assad are one and the same. I mean, England is going to increase its support of the Iraqi government in its fight against the Islamic State because Assad right now is one of the biggest recruiters of the Islamic State. The actual quote is one of the greatest recruiting sergeants for the group ISIS. So they're trying to convince everyone that Assad and the Islamic State, they're one and the same. Now, if you go back many reports, this was the plan from the beginning, to get into Syria and remove Assad. They were going to eventually make the link that Assad and the Islamic State are one and the same. Why? Because they knew they could use the authorization for war to remove Assad. Because, again, what does the authorization for war say? They can go after the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, or any other terrorist organization. Now, they made the link, and this is why they're continuing using the propaganda. They made the link that Assad and the Islamic State are working together. He's recruiting for them. So now they have the case, or they're making the case, to remove Assad. Now all they need to do is get that authorization for war passed. And we're going to see them do this with some type of an event. What it will be, we don't know. Will it be big? Most likely. And we're going to have to watch that very carefully. And I believe at this point, from all the indicators and the propaganda, we see this is building up for August. Now, can it change? Of course. We've seen their plans change many, many times. But at this point in time, we see that they are on track. We see that China now is being implicated in cyber attacking Germany and the U.S. federal personnel data. And they're coming out there right away saying, yes, the 4 million federal workers, their information was hacked into, and it definitely was, let me say, China. This time it is China. Now again, these are advanced actors. Do you really think they're just going to do something like this? And why do they want surface information on 4 million federal workers? What, their phone numbers, addresses? If you noticed, all these attacks are always on the surface. They get their phone numbers, they get their addresses, they get nothing meaty. Because their agenda here is, one, to blame China, Russia, North Korea, Syria, Iran for these attacks. Agenda number 2 is they need CISA passed. Because they just passed the USA Freedom Act, which allows corporations to spy on all Americans and hand over that information to the government. The thing they're missing is that they need CISA because it will allow the companies to be they won't be liable if something happens to the data or if something happens to the people where the data is transferred over to the government. So it will make them immune, and this is the part they need, and this is why we're seeing these cyber attacks right now, because they want this law passed. We most likely will see more attacks occur very soon. Now, there is a video out there, and I have it on the X22Report.com site, and this is coming from Trevor Aronson, an investigative reporter, executive director of the Florida Center for Investigative Reporting, author of The Terror Factory, Inside the FBI's Manufactured War on Terrorism. He is saying that the FBI is responsible for more terrorism plots in the United States than any other organization, more than Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, you name it. The FBI is creating the terror, creating the false flags. He spent years researching and writing about FBI terrorism stings, and they usually choose the mentally disturbed, destitute Muslims, and they orchestrate the false flag event with informants, and they use this information to prove that the Islamic State is creating terror here in the United States. Al-Qaeda is creating terror. There's domestic terrorists. And he's saying that the informants, some are convicted rape and child molestation, and they pay them about $100,000 per sting. And he goes into detail where he says the FBI is responsible for more terrorism plots in the United States. He spent years pouring through the case files of terrorism prosecutions in the United States, and he's come to the conclusion that the FBI is much better at creating terrorists than it is catching real terrorists. And we know this for a fact because we heard from other CIA operatives saying the governments create 99% of all terrorism. And we've kind of had proof, because the TSA was set up, DHS was set up, and in the last 15 years or so, not one terrorist, even the Boston bombing, DHS, TSA, none of these alphabet agencies figured out that there was going to be a terrorist plot in Boston. You know why? Because it was done by the government. Because all this terrorism that we're seeing is the government. It is to keep you scared. It's to keep you in fear, to make you do things you really don't want to do, you normally wouldn't do. You wouldn't give up your rights. You wouldn't give up your security. But this is what they want you to do. They want you to go to war. This is why the FBI is out there saying, listen, you're going to have to give your freedoms up for security. And when you hear this, this is completely opposite of what our founding father said. Benjamin Franklin, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And the government right now is telling you to give it up. To give up your liberty, your freedom, your rights. This is how you know the government is not for the people. Because they're doing exactly what the founding fathers said not to do. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.